Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on Night with the Experts. This is a monthly program by NEIS on the last Thursday of each month, which brings nuclear experts to you and gives you an opportunity to talk to them on various nuclear issues. So we kind of turn the idea of a webinar on its head. There will be a short presentation by our guest, and that will be followed by a much larger block of time where you'll have a chance to ask questions and have a discussion. Now, tonight's topic I am really pleased about. Many of you know that the issue of climate change has been on people's mind, and nuclear power is often put forward as a solution to it, or at least a partial solution. But what has often been ignored is what are the effects of climate change on nuclear power. One of our much admired colleagues who formerly was with the Union of Concerned Scientists, David Lochbaum, once quipped, and I'll paraphrase him here, he was pointing out people think that nuclear power is going to protect us from climate change, but his rebuttal question is, who's going to protect nuclear power from climate change? And I think our guest tonight will be addressing that, so I'm really pleased and grateful to have Jeff Mitman with us. We will be recording this tonight, and at the end, we will also provide the chat, which is disabled now, but it will be activated after the presenter makes his remarks. That will be sent to you since you registered after the program as well. So I'm going to make sure we have everybody in, and then we will turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jan Boudart, who will introduce our guests. So one moment here. There. Jan, it's all yours.
Thanks to everyone who's come tonight, and it's really wonderful to see this audience here. Our guest is Jeff Mitman, who our good friend Paul Gunter is a colleague of his and recommended highly that we bring him in tonight with the experts. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Nuclear Engineering from the University of Michigan. He participated in the 2011 NRC mission to Tokyo to support and advise the U.S. ambassador to Japan on the Fukushima accident. He also contributed to the development of human reliability analyses and common cause failure methods and probabilistic risk analysis standards. And those standards are the standards that are accepted in the industry. Jeff is a long member of the American Nuclear Society. I do not want to take a long time introducing him. You can all look up on the websites that he's part of. And so I want to turn the time over to him immediately so he can talk about climate change's impact on nuclear plant safety and the NRC's non-response. So please go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to start sharing now and see if I can get this all to work correctly. Okay. Jan, do you see the big screen with my title page on it?
I do not, but that doesn't mean it isn't up. I'm trying to get my screen.
Let me try again. Let me make sure I get this right.
You got it now,
Jeff? Looks like it's coming now. Oh.
All right.
There we go. Yes, very good.
All right, there it is. So as David and Jan said, my name is Jeff Mitman, and I'm here to talk about climate change and its impact on nuclear power plant safety and what the NRC thinks about it. Jan went through my bio a little bit already. Couple things to focus on One is I've got about 45 years in working in the industry, both for General Electric, the Electric Power Research Institute, and the NRC. So I've kind of worked at multiple organizations that have different perspectives, different roles and responsibilities. So I get a pretty good cross section of things. The agenda for tonight, we've got about an hour and a half, and if it goes longer than that, I can support that. I've got about 20 slides to talk through, and I'm hoping to do that in about 45 minutes, leaving lots of time for questions and answers. And so the topics I want to talk about tonight are why climate and climate change are important to nuclear plant safety and environmental impacts. And I'm going to use two primary examples: Duane Arnold, a derecho that happened there in 2020, and a Coney nuclear plant down in South Carolina, and flooding issues that have been internally discussed at the NRC with Duke, the licensee, for decades, and a little bit of impact of climate change there. A slide or two on the current NRC regulations regarding external events, which would include climate change, the current NRC position on climate change, and what's wrong with that position. And I'll just summarize it here. The NRC fails to protect plants from unique climate change vulnerabilities, and the NRC is out of step with other arms of the U.S. federal government. So why is climate and climate change important to nuclear safety? So hurricanes, tornadoes, and other high wind events like derechos, flooding, and losses of offsite power are significant contributors to nuclear power plant risk and safety. One thing that's a little unique about flooding events is for most events, if the wind speeds, if the plant's designed for, say, 130-mile-an-hour wind speeds, and they have an event where it's 135, well, that stresses the components a little bit more. But there's probably some margin, and you're probably okay, because it's just an incremental increase in the stresses on the plant. But with flooding, you often run into cliff edge effects, and what they are is, if you have a flood wall that's 10 foot tall and you think you're only going to get flooding to 8 foot, you got 2 foot of margin. But if you get 10 foot and an inch, the water goes over the wall, and now you can have significantly different impacts from just a 1-inch change in flood heights. And that's a cliff edge effect. And of course, flooding can be a serious risk, and you have to take those cliff edge effects into consideration. Losses of offsite power are dominant contributors to most nuclear power plants. And so, the plant during normal operations is running, it's generating electricity, and it's putting it out on the grid. But when things go wrong, the first source of power for the plant to run equipment that's needed to deal with the event is offsite power. And now every plant is required and has a backup source of emergency power, typically emergency diesel generators. But your first source of power, the first place you want to go to, is offsite power, because it's big, it's vast, and there are lots of power plants on that grid that can supply it. But when you get these external events, either high winds or flooding, they can disrupt offsite power. So when we do our risk analysis for most plants, offsite power, loss of offsite power is a big risk to the plant safety. So sometimes I talk about external events. Sometimes I'll talk about weather-related events. They're kind of sort of interchangeable, but external events or weather events, climate events are one subset of external events. Another big category of external events would be earthquakes, but I don't see a lot of connection between earthquakes and climate change. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but they're just, if they're there, they're not apparent. And it's certainly way outside my area of expertise. So why we've talked about external events, what does climate change have to do with that? Well, climate change is increasing the frequency of events and also increases the severity of events. So the federal government is actually exploring creating a new category of hurricanes that I think they're calling Category 6, which is even bigger hurricanes with higher wind speeds. And that's due to, they're thinking about that because of climate change. So that's a severity, an example of the severity increasing. Another example would be, if the biggest rainstorm that anybody predicts is X, well, climate change says you might get more rain and then you get 2X, probably not twice as much water, but maybe 10%, maybe 20%, maybe 50% more water. And so that's where the severity of the events can go up. And of course, you can also have an increase in frequency. You can see them happening more often. So both of these go into the safety analysis or the risk analysis, and they can stress the safety of the plant and raise the risks from the nuclear power plant. So there are two examples I want to talk about mostly tonight. And the first one's about a derecho at the Duane Arnold plant. So this is a beautiful day at Duane Arnold a couple of years back. And I want to bring up a laser pointer. And Dave, can you tell me whether you can see my laser pointer?
I can see it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So the reactor is in the reactor building here. There's probably the turbine buildings back here. The primary source, the emergency source of cooling water is the river back here, and you'll see a pump house over here. And in emergencies, this is the source of water that they would normally use to cool the plant. Okay, but over here are the non-safety related cooling towers. They're pretty big structures. They're not safety related, so they're not relied upon in the safety analysis. But because they can be used to cool the reactor, they do lower the risk from any events that happen. All right, and what else do I want to talk about these? I think they're a combination of metal and wood. As I said, they're not safety related. These are in contrast to the big concrete, the high concrete parabolic cooling towers that most plants have. But a bunch of plants have these low cooling towers too. So this is what the Power Magazine had to say in late August of 2020. Derecho damage forces early retirement of Duane Arnold Nuclear Power Plant. Duane Arnold's a 615 megawatt nuclear power plant in Palo, Iowa, and will reportedly not restart after high winds caused extensive damage to station's cooling towers. Plant owners NextEra had planned to retire the plant in October 30th, 2020, a couple months in advance of this event. But after assessing the damage caused by the August 10th derecho, the company decided to accelerate the retirement process. So I wasn't familiar with what a derecho was until this event happened. But a derecho is a large storm front with very high winds. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slides. But this particular one had a storm front that was 100 miles wide, and wind speeds recorded by the National Weather Service up to 130 miles an hour. And it's a little bit different from, or it's very different from either a tornado or a hurricane. Tornado can have high wind speeds, but they're very localized, and they're typically in a circular motion, and they come and go very fast. And a hurricane can have high wind speeds too, higher than 130 miles an hour. Also circular, but in a much bigger circle. But also it typically passes in an hour or so. So let me show you another picture of the cooling towers. So this is an old picture of the cooling towers, black and white, from 1979. And you'll see in here the two things in let me get my laser pointer working again. There we go. The two things in here that I want in the circles. That's a steel pipe down here, and this is a very tall light pole, and it gives you kind of a little bit of a sense of the size of this thing, and we'll show you. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the derecho. So this is what the National Weather Service had to say about the derecho. Okay, what we have here is a map of Iowa, and here in the middle is Cedar Rapids, and 10 miles north of Cedar Rapids is the Duane Arnold plant, and just so we have up here, which is about 50 miles. So from Cedar Rapids to Waterloo is about 50 miles. 10 miles is right around in here. And so you see this yellow area of the map where the Weather Service said they got to 120 miles plus mile. And at the plant, the plant personnel think that the wind speeds got up to 140 miles an hour. So the previous slide talked about how the cooling tower was damaged. Now I'll show you a picture of it. So to me, that cooling tower doesn't look very damaged. It looks destroyed. And we pointed out the light pole, and there are those pieces of steel pipe. Both survived. Now, I do want to stress again that the cooling tower is not safety related. It's not needed to shut the plant down, but it does lower the risk. Because it's another way of cooling the plant if it's available. In this case, it clearly is not available. So what do we want to talk about this? So this is the obvious damage that was done to the Duane Arnold nuclear power plant by the derecho. Other things to talk about are that there was some damage to secondary containment. The licensee kind of characterized it as minor. There was also impact on the emergency diesel generators. Several hours after the storm passed, they had a lot of debris accumulating in the service water, partially blocked one of the strainers on one of the diesel generator cooling water systems, and that had to be bypassed. From a risk perspective, that is very significant. Okay, that increased the likelihood of both diesel generators failing significantly. And if they had failed, they don't have offsite power, they don't have cooling towers, they don't have the emergency diesels, then it becomes a very, very complicated event. Normally on an event like this, with the risk as high as this, the NRC would send out what they call an augmented inspection team, which is the second tier of a three-tier process, second most severe. But the NRC didn't send out an inspection team. My take on that is they knew the plant was going to shut down in a couple of months anyway, and so they didn't see any need to send out a lot of people to it. So they never talked to the operators. They never recorded anything that the operators saw or heard. They didn't talk to the engineering staff. They didn't talk to the maintenance staff. They didn't talk to management. None of this is recorded in any kind of event analysis recording what the plant saw, what the plant experienced. And the primary reason for sending out an inspection team is to collect that kind of information, to record it, and then distribute that information to both the domestic industry and the international industry, because it's a lesson learned, and it could help other plants learn from this event and therefore be better protected. But the NRC didn't do what their own procedures said for them to do. So the ultimate question here is, was this event caused by climate change? Or was the event made more severe by climate change? And it's really impossible to say. They had never experienced a derecho at the plant before. Some of the information that is available, that the plant says that they've never experienced anything like this in Iowa before. So, and it really doesn't matter whether climate change was involved or not. The important thing is that, you know, there's a lesson to be learned. A derecho like this or any high wind event can do really significant damage to plants, and the plants need to be prepared to deal with it. So now I'm going to switch over to the other example I want to use, which is the Oconee nuclear plant. And the Oconee nuclear plant is a 3-unit site or reactor with three reactors, or a site with 3 reactors in northwest South Carolina. What you see here is the reactors are down here, and I'll give you a better picture of this in a minute, but I want to get the big picture layout of this. Three reactors, turbine building, switch yards over here. The cooling water intake is here, and there's a dam that stretches all the way across here. And this is a hydro unit over here. And when I was talking about Dwayne Arnold, I said that almost every plant in the country has emergency diesel generators. There's one plant in the country that doesn't. There's only one plant in the world that I know of that doesn't have emergency diesel generators, and that's Oconee. And Oconee doesn't have them because their emergency source of electrical power is 2 hydro units in this dam. Very unique, very different. The dam along here is at an elevation. The top of the dam is at 815 feet above mean sea level, as are the earthworks around here. They're at 815 feet. And that's, I don't know, 1,500 foot long dam. And plant elevation down here is at 796 feet above sea level. And normal water level behind this dam is at 800. So normal water level is at 800. The plant is 4 feet lower than that. Seems like a pretty unique place, pretty strange place for me, in my mind, to build a big nuclear power plant. So the plant is directly beneath the dam, adjacent to the dam. Couple other things to point out. There are 3 access roads. this one across a bridge here, this one across a bridge here, and this one beneath the dam. If the Jocassee Dam failures, and we'll talk about Jocassee in a minute, all three roads are going to be flooded and destroyed. The only way to get in and out while will be by helicopter. What else to say? Reactor buildings, the turbine buildings, the intake we've talked about. We'll talk a lot about Jocassee, but if Jocassee fails, it's a dam that's 10 miles upriver fails. Duke calculates that they might get as much as 3 million cubic feet per second coming out of that dam. Now, I'm not calibrated in million cubic feet per second, so I did a little lookup several years ago, and the normal water level, the normal flow in the Mississippi River at New Orleans is 600,000 cubic feet per second. So 3 million cubic feet per second would be 6 Mississippi rivers. We'll go to the next slide. So this is a different view of a Coney. It looks more like a nuclear power plant. The 3 reactor buildings, the turbine buildings. This is the intake here in the foreground. The switch yard where all the normal electrical power comes in and out of the plant. And here's the end of the dam. All right, and there's a facility in here called the Standby Shutdown Facility, or SSF for short. And as I said before, the crest of the dam is at 815 feet. Plant grade here is at 796. Normal water level behind the dam is 800 feet. Now, when this plant was originally licensed back in the early 1970s, it was designed, built, and licensed as a dry site. What that means is that Duke, the licensee, convinced themselves and the regulator, which at the time was the Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor organization to the NRC, they convinced the regulator that there was no way that flooding was an issue at this plant, even though there's water on 2 sides, 3 sides. There's 1 million acre feet of water behind the Kiwi Dam or in the Kiwi Reservoir. But they convinced themselves in the NRC, the AEC, that this was a dry site. And so they didn't have to protect the plant from flooding. And because they didn't protect the plant from flooding, the equipment in the plant is not all protected from flooding. In the basement of the turbine building is some of the emergency core cooling system, the service water systems, and some aux feed water systems. And the turbine building is not watertight. And that doesn't mean that if they get water, it'll leak a little bit. It means that if they get any water on grade, the turbine building basement will fill up with water. And that emergency equipment that I just described, the service water systems and the aux feed water systems, are in the basement of the turbine building. And it'll go underwater. And so that equipment will fail. Now, there's other equipment that's in the auxiliary building and in the reactor buildings that won't flood, but all that equipment needs service water. And the only service water that the emergency core cooling system has is supplied by these pumps that are in the basement of the turbine building. Also, a little bit above grade, about a foot above grade, is the electrical distribution switch gear, the emergency switch gear. And if you get a little over a foot of water on grade, then that water will go or that equipment, that electrical equipment will go underwater too. And if it goes, then it's a second reason why the emergency equipment won't run, because much of it is dependent upon AC power, and water and AC power don't mix very well. So that's the emergency core cooling system. It's in the basement. Some of it's in the basement of the turbine building. Now that's the safety related equipment. After the plant was built, Duke started to realize that the plant had some vulnerabilities, and they added this standby shutdown facility, or SSF. And in it, there is a small diesel generator there, and there are pumps. But this equipment, while good quality, it's not safety grade. It's not the high quality stuff that typically always comprises the emergency core cooling system. And along with it not being safety grade, it's not single fault. It's a single train system, so it's not one failure any place can cause multiple parts of it to fail or all of it to fail. And when they build it primarily to take care of fires, vulnerabilities from fires and tornadoes. They still weren't concerned about flooding, so they didn't build the SSF to deal with flooding. So if they had water level above grade, that would go into the basement of the SSF, which is where the diesel is for the SSF. In the 80s, they finally acknowledged to themselves that they had a flooding issue, and they built a wall around the SSF. And in around 2008, 2010, they extended that wall to about a little bit higher, to about 7.5 feet. So what do we want to talk about next? So, as I said, about 10 miles upstream of Oconee is another dam. And this one is the Jocassee Dam, and this is a bigger dam. It's 385 foot high, about 1,800 foot long. The crest is at 1125. The normal water level behind Jocassee is at 1,110 feet. And this is Duke describes it as a very well-built, designed, constructed, and operated dam. And it also impounds about 1 million acre feet of water. Now, I don't know if 1 million acre feet of water makes a lot of, registers. And so in preparation for this presentation, I went out and I looked around, and the Great Salt Lake out in Utah is about 1 million acres, which is about 1,700 square miles. So 1 million acre feet of water is the Great Salt Lake to the depth of 1 foot. That would be 1 million acres by 1 foot, or 1 million acre feet of water. That's how much water is behind Jocassee. And there's another 1 million acre feet of water in the Kiwi Lake, right upstream of the plant. So to give a little bit of perspective, this is another view of Jocassee. The Jocassee Dam, you get a better sense of the height of the dam here. 385 feet tall and 1,200 feet long. So you could put I don't know, 5 football fields on the face of that dam. To the right is over here is the pump house. Well, the pump house and the generators are over here. Duke says that Jocassee is a really good dam. I have no no reason, no basis to challenge them on this characterization. They know the dam better than anybody else. But I will say that the average dam in the United States, if you take, has a failure frequency of about 2 chances in 10,000 years. This is a really good dam. It's probably better than average. But you know, the dam's never been filled to the top, which is a good thing. But that means the top of the dam has never been challenged either. So it's kind of like an unknown there. So to put this all in perspective, I created this drawing, if you will, of the plant. It's to scale in the vertical axis. So from bottom to top, it's to scale. Right to left on the horizontal axis, it's not to scale. As I said, the big thing is there's 10 miles between the Kiwi Dam and the Jocassee Dam. But that's the real water level up there at the top of Jocassee. Plant grade is here. The reactors are just at about plant grade. The reactor buildings come up a couple hundred feet. In the foreground here is the standby shutdown facility. There's, like I said, there's 1 million acre feet here behind Jocassee, another 1 million acre feet behind Kiwi, and the intake canals here. And you'll notice that the level behind the lake, behind Kiwi and in the intake canal is above grade. Okay. Probably too small to see are some of the notes that I've written on here. The turbine building is behind the reactor buildings, and that's where that service water, cooling water systems are located. And what else do I want to say? That there's that 7.5 foot wall protecting the SSF from flooding. Now, there's a dashed blue line that you see here, and that's the flood elevation that Duke has calculated as it's the most extreme calculated flood height from a Jocassee dam failure. So that's what Duke says could happen in the worst case, with a worst case analysis. And I want to reiterate that, you know, the site was designed as a dry site with no protections in the plant design to deal with flooding whatsoever. The SSF was added after the fact, and there was no flood wall around it. It was originally built to 5 foot, and the flood wall's been extended to 7.5 foot. So why is flooding, the climate, and climate change important to Oconee and the safety at Oconee? As I said, in the 70s, the plant was designed as a dry site. There's no protection from floods. Any flooding above grades disables the emergency core cooling system and the emergency power distribution system. That leaves only the standby shutdown facility as the only permanently installed equipment to deal with a flood. The SSF is not safety related. It was added after the plant was designed, primarily to deal with tornadoes, fires, and other vulnerabilities, but not flooding. The wall around the SSF was added after the SSF was finished. Current design does not consider climate change on the severity or frequency of floods. So if the plant was designed to be a dry site back in 1970, well, climate change, it can change the severity of a storm. Okay, so even if you don't have a dam failure, the climate change can potentially increase the amount of water that would fall on the site directly from a storm over the site. The plant was never designed to deal with that. Likewise, Jocassee Dam was designed to pass what they call the probable maximum precipitation and the probable maximum flood. But that design never took into consideration climate change either. So will climate change increase the size of the storm that could put water behind Jocassee Dam? Certainly. Will it put enough water? Will the increase in the amount of water exceed the capacity of the dam? Duke's never looked at it. Don't have to. They're never required to do that. We'll get into that more in the future. So back in 2010, 2011, the NRC was in a long discussion with Duke about how much flood protection they needed. They came out with a final decision in January of 2011, and then in March of 2011, the Fukushima accident happened, and that was, of course, as many people know, earthquake caused a tsunami, and the tsunami put a 45-foot wall of water onto the plant, which destroyed the electrical distribution system. In any case, the NRC required all licensees, including Duke, to redo flooding analysis. And at the end of the day, prior to the Fukushima accident, they were required to have 19 feet of protection. After Fukushima, they were required to have 4.5 feet of protection. And so the lesson learned from the Fukushima accident was that Duke could lower the flood protection at Oconee by some 15 feet. So now we're going to talk about NRC requirements, and this will get a little wordy, and I don't have any way to show you interesting photos on this. So just bear with me on the words. All right. So for external events, the primary requirement for design of a plant is in 10 CFR, that's Code of Federal Regulation, Part 50, Appendix B, Criterion 2, which says that structures, systems, and components important to safety, like the ECCS, shall be designed to withstand effects of natural phenomena such as tornado, hurricanes, and floods without loss of capability to perform their safety functions. Design basis for structure, systems, and components shall reflect appropriate considerations of most severe natural phenomena that have been historically, and I want to emphasize, historically reported for site and surrounding area with sufficient margin for limited accuracy, quantity, and period of time in which the historical data has been accumulated. You have to look at appropriate combinations of external events and of safety functions and the importance of the safety functions to be performed. So the design requirements that were written back in the 1970s and 60s and 70s was look at the historical record and see what has happened in the past and design your plant to take care of that. But this is long before anybody recognized climate change. So what you have is you need to look at the historical record, but the historical record goes back a couple hundred years at best. And so that's why the regulations required you to look at taking into consideration and adding margin, because the historical record is relatively short. And so the regulations for the design and licensing of power plants is backward looking. Look at the worst thing that can happen and make sure that your ECCS, your emergency cooling system, can survive that. Well, now we bring in climate change. Well, climate change says that the past is not going to help you. It's not going to give you the entire picture about what might happen in the future, because things are more frequent and more severe. And so the regulation is completely silent to looking forward and taking into consideration climate change. So I'll reiterate, these are NRC design requirements intended to protect plants from external events, including those caused by climate and climate change, hopefully. But they are for new plant designs, and as such, they're static. Once you've built the plant, licensed the plant, you're not required to go back and revisit that information when you have new information. So in this case, Oconee got their licenses in the early 70s. They're never required to go back and look at new information that comes in. Now, the NRC, be fair, NRC can at any time say, we've got some new information, we want you to take a look at it. That's what happened with Fukushima. There's new information came in, and the NRC required everybody to look at flooding from this perspective of the Fukushima accident. But there's no requirement for the licensee to do it, and there's no requirement or guidance for the NRC when to do that either. So we'll go on to the next slide. So the previous slide talked about what the design requirements for new plants are. Now, what did the NRC do post Fukushima? As I've talked about a little bit already, the NRC required all plants to reevaluate flooding and earthquake hazards. Our emphasis is on flooding. However, and these requirements came out in 2012. Okay, so climate change was on some people's minds in 2012. When the NRC wrote the requirements for the industry to go look at flooding hazards, they were silent about climate change. There's nothing in the post-Fukushima work that asks them to do any evaluation whatsoever about climate change when they redid the flooding hazards. Now, if you go looking for this decision, you can't find it. It's not in the record. Okay, it's the only thing you can find is the absence of the NRC addressing climate change. It's just not there. I looked for it when I still worked for the NRC, couldn't find it. I've talked to people that are even more knowledgeable about it than I am, and it came up in some of the discussions, but management told the staff not to worry about it, and so it was never addressed. So what's the NRC's position on climate change? They have told people in some documents what their perspectives are, I should say is. So impacts of natural phenomena on nuclear power plant systems, structures, and components are outside the scope of the NRC's license renewal environmental review. That's from the Oconee draft New Reg 1437. It goes on to say effects of climate change on Oconee stations, structure, systems, and components are outside the scope of the NRC's license renewal environmental review. Now, this the document that I cite, New Reg 1437, is specifically about Oconee, but that's the same language and the same message that they convey on other plants that are going through license renewal. Don't worry about it. We're not going to look at it. We don't see a problem. Now, this is purely my opinion. Their perspective on operating plant safety is similar, i.e., we'll address it when it becomes a problem. There's no requirements currently for the industry to look at it, and as best I know, the plants are not looking at it. What can I say? Again, there's an absence of a policy statement on that. But we can talk a little bit more on that and what other people think the NRC is doing or not doing. So the White House has a group called the Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, and they wrote a document last year and published it, and it supplied the information that I'm quoting here. Agencies should consider increased risks associated with development in floodplains, avoiding such development whenever there is proactive alternative. Agencies should consider likelihood of increased temperatures and more frequent or severe storms. That's what I've been talking about mostly. Increased frequency or increased severity of storms over lifetime of the proposed actions. Okay, so there's guidance. It tells the NRC that it should be looking at the impact of climate change on the plant. Now, the NRC, to be fair, the NRC does think about climate change. It thinks about what the operation of the nuclear plant, what impacts it will have on climate change, but not what impacts climate change will have on plant safety or the environmental impacts. So I don't know how many people recognize this, but it's fact, and it's well understood within the agency and the industry. The NRC is an independent agency. And so the White House Council on Environmental Quality and its guidance cannot be enforced on independent agencies. And so the NRC's position is, we're an independent agency, therefore we, the NRC, do not have to comply with this guidance. So they look at the guidance and they say, that's interesting, but we're independent and we don't think it's of concern. So just this year, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, came out with a report on this very topic. And what they write in that report is this: NRC's actions to address risks to nuclear power plants from natural hazards in its licensing, license renewal, and inspection processes do not fully consider potential increases in risk from natural hazards that may be exacerbated by climate change. I give you the document there. Dave is going to supply some links in the chat, and there's a link that goes to that document. The document also goes on to say, without incorporating best available information into its licensing and oversight processes, it's unclear whether safety margins for nuclear power plants established during the licensing period, in most cases over 40 years ago, are adequate to address risks that climate change pose to power to plants. So it's not just my opinion that the NRC should do more. It's also the GAO's opinion. So I'm going to give the final thought to this final quote. Let me give you the context on it. I've been working with Beyond Nuclear on subsequent license renewal applications by Duke Power on Oconee, and also on license renewal for the North Anna Power Station up in Virginia. And we applied for a hearing to look at, among other things, the climate change. And the board came out just 2 weeks ago with their decision, and they denied us our hearing request. But there are three judges on that board, And one of the judges dissented, and this is what that judge had to say. The judge is Mr. Gibson, and he's actually the licensing board chair. So that it is hardly reception. So, this is hardly the reception that climate change should be given, i.e., to deny the hearing. As CEQ, federal government's chief source for assessing the importance of climate change in environmental analysis under NEPA has made clear, quote, the U.S. faces profound climate crisis, and there is little time left to avoid dangerous, potentially catastrophic climate trajectory. Climate change is a fundamental environmental issue, and its effects on the human environment fall squarely within NEPA's purview. Sadly, the licensing board's majority and the NRC staff have failed to heed this warning. So again, I have my opinion, but here's the presiding judge on the north end that kind of lays out the same perspective. So, Dave, that's all I have at this point of my prepared remarks. Are we ready to take questions?
Yes, thank you very much for an incredible presentation. And it's just one slice of the pie. So it's remarkable what you've been able to pack into this, and we really appreciate that. Just for people's benefit.
I thought that Jeff was going to show a short video of a plant threatened by flood.
Well,
I can do that. When I was a couple hours before the presentation, I was going over my slides, making sure I understood everything, what I wanted to say. And I remembered an event that happened at St. Lucie. St. Lucie is a plant in the northeast Florida, right on the Florida coast. It's one of the newer plants. And there was an event back in, I forget when it was, 2013, thereabouts. Storm came up the coast, put a lot of water onto the plant. But fortunately, St. Lucie it was not designed as a dry site. It was designed to take, because it's on the coast, it's in Florida. It's a later plant. They thought a lot about flooding, and it was designed to take flooding. And so some of the flood protection around the site was they have canals that drain the site, and then their pipe. Anytime a pipe goes through the walls of the plant, there's flood seals in all the penetration. And the doors are all good quality, high quality doors. And so they're designed to take big hurricanes. And the way they're designed to do that is keep the water out of the plant. So this storm comes up the coast. It's a significant storm, but it's nowhere near the big storm that the plant was designed for. And two things had happened. One, they had allowed vegetation to grow in the canals, the drainage canals around the site. Hadn't kept the foliage out of that. And so the canals didn't pass as much water as they were designed to pass. And lo and behold, even though a couple years before they'd done at least one, maybe two walkdowns of the plant, specifically looking at flood seals, lo and behold, a couple of flood seals that they thought were there weren't. And so this is what happens when a big storm comes up. And I need to share again, right?
right. Go to the share screen and remember that little box for video, and then and you're on your own.
So I want to share this, and we'll hit share, and it gives me some options. I don't see the options. We're sharing the wrong thing. Let's try again. Stop sharing. Share. Screen 2. Share. And Dave, do you see that video?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's running fine.
All right, I'm going to restart it. All right, so this plant is kind of sort of on the beach, okay? And so the plant grade is a couple feet above sea level, but the plant goes down. So there are at least 2 elevations below grade, okay? This is the first elevation below grade in the auxiliary building. And then there's another elevation beneath this. Now, keep in mind that plant grade is a couple feet above sea level. So we're standing, or the person taking this video is below sea level, but the plant's built to take it. It operates fine, and so it's fine with it. It keeps the water out most of the time. But the canals filled up from the storm. They backed up into some areas where they hadn't anticipated backup, and those flood seals were messing. And what you're looking at here is water coming through electrical conduits and coming into the plant because of those missing flood seals. Now, the licensee estimates that about 50,000 gallons of water came into the plant. And it's coming in, what you see here is this first level down below grade. And I said that there was an elevation lower down. Well, then the elevation lower down is where the emergency core cooling system is. So where is this water going? Well, it's coming to the first elevation, and then it's cascading down through various means to the first floor. And so what's 50,000 gallons of water do to your emergency core cooling system? Well, if it gets too high, the motors and the electrical equipment will go below the water level, and they'll stop working. But the plant operators were really good. They had a couple of sump pumps down there that they were using to pump the water out. And so the water would come into the first elevation, and they could control the leakage rate to some degree between the first floor and the second floor. And they kind of modulated things so that the water didn't get too high here on the first floor, and they didn't get too high down in the basement either. Now, one of the unique characteristics of that, those sump pumps that they use so effectively are not emergency grade sump pumps. And so if they'd lost their normal electric power supply, while they'd have some really good diesel generators, those diesel generators couldn't have been used to run the sump pumps. So I'll let it run for a little bit, and then I'll stop it again. I'll show you something. Now, what you see here is a guy talking on a phone, presumably to the control room, telling him what he sees. And he's standing in a couple inches of water. What's horrifying to me is here to his left, our right, is electrical panels. And those are probably 480 volt electrical panels, and they're energized right now. And so if the water level gets a couple inches deeper, he'll be standing in a big old bathtub with 480 volts. I would not be comfortable with that. but he was. And as is the camera operator taking this video. So again, that this is not the worst case storm that the plant was designed to withstand. Was it impacted by climate change? You know, you can't tell what storms were and what storms weren't. But it just shows you what can happen with a big storm, and if everything doesn't quite go as planned. And I guess we could say that this is an example of a cliff edge effect where you've got a missing flood seal and your flood protection doesn't work the way it was designed to work.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I am going to turn this back to Dave now, and he'll probably give it back to me for the Q&A. But anyway, Dave, you make the transition.
Sure, thank you. And again, thanks for that video. I think it sort of makes the point, Jeff. So.
Oh, yeah.
So for our guests here tonight, I want you to know that we will be activating the chat shortly, and that chat will be made available and sent to all the registrants automatically after the session is over tonight. So if you do have questions, comments, you can put those in there. We'll share them with Jeff. And also, Jeff has provided a very extensive set of URLs and references, which will be attached to your chat. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this tonight, and we will make the Zoom recording available for within the next day or so, but it's only for private use. It's not to be posted or sold. But if you really need to have a copy of it, you need to contact us at NEIS. That would be NEIS@neis.org, and we'll be happy to share it with you. So we are going to move into the next section of the event tonight, where you get a chance to ask questions, get into dialogue and communicate. So I'll turn it over to Jan, and she will give you the instructions for that part. Jan, take it away.
At the bottom of your screen, you see a thing that says reactions. Goodness, where is it? I don't see it now. Well, anyway, raise your hand. And oh yeah, see, Steve Sondheim found his. He raised his hand on the contraption, but if that's not working for you, I'll try to pick up your hand if you raise it, and try to keep you in order of the people who raise their hands. So if you do have a question, raise your hand one way or another, and I will try to get to you. Now, usually we restrict comments to 3 minutes, but I'm, not home, and I'm a little bit discombobulated in a public space. So if you do make a comment and it gets too long, I may ask you to cut it off. But anyway, Jeff has already said that he's got time tonight, and so let's just get audience responses, not only to what Jeff had to say, but to him. His presentation was, well, I really, really liked it. So anyway, let's go to Stephen Sondheim for your question or your comment. Unmute, Steve. Hey, Steve.
Okay, it took me a second. Hi, Jeff, this was fantastic, and showed so many vulnerable points and points that could or should be taken care of. I put my 2 questions in the chat for everybody to see. One was, let me go to the second one first. Just a second. Okay, I got to read my own. Lately, there's been lots of building, bridge, rail, and shipping failures. We see buildings just falling down because they haven't been inspected or because they weren't built properly, so forth and so on. So has the failure of these dams been reevaluated due to age, wear, and what you pointed out, that parts of the dams are above water and could have been, I'm no engineer, but could have been dried out or not tested. So have they been reevaluated, and who would pay for such? That's one question. The other is simply a cost question. What are the risks of higher electrical rates due to more costs to maintain this plant and the dams? Thank you.
So the question about dams, the NRC doesn't regulate dams. So it's not their responsibility to think about that. Dams in the US are regulated. It depends on who owns the dam, who regulates it. The Federal Emergency Regulatory Commission, FERC, regulates a lot of dams. They regulate the Oconee, the Jocassee, and the Kiwi dams. The US Corps of Engineers owns and regulates a lot of dams. The US Bureau of Reclamation also is involved with it. Small dams might be regulated or are often regulated by the state. So, you know, it's a mixed group of who regulates it and what they're looking at. I'm a nuclear engineer with experience in risk analysis plan operations. I don't know much about dams, whether they're regulated enough, whether they're not. I really don't have an opinion about that. You would think that these other entities would be thinking about climate change, and I know many of them are. And you would think that they're looking at the impact on dams and how much margin and is there enough margin. But there's enough to keep me busy trying to understand what's going on in the nuclear industry, let alone the dam world. As far as costs go, well, the NRC hasn't required Duke to do anything recently about dam safety, so there are no extra costs involved with that. There were a bunch of costs coming out of what the agency did post Fukushima. The numbers you see tossed around are about the industry spent about $2 billion doing the analysis and buying the extra equipment that was required by that analysis. Presumably all that's been paid for or worked into the rate base for the local utilities, and presumably all the cost impact on that is already baked into the rate bases that people are paying for the electricity that they buy. Does that address your questions?
Yes, except, obviously the NRC is not regulating those dams, but somebody ought to be worried about it. Perhaps we as a group need to make an effort to get that looked at seriously.
I know for fact that the Jocassee and the Kiwi dams are regulated by FERC. Whether they're looking at climate change, I could do some web searches. It wouldn't surprise me if they are. I have some. I've looked at the flooding analysis on Jocassee, and I've always had questions about the flooding analysis on Jocassee, but that's another hour to talk about, and it can go into lots of detail real quick. So
okay, thank you.
I won't try to cover that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, now I'm going to call on Dave and then Craig. Mark had a really interesting question, which he can either read or I will read from the chat. So it's going to be Dave, Craig, and then Mark Lundholm. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thanks. We're going to shift to another one of the prime elements of the universe. You've talked about water, and I'm going to shift over to fire a little bit. In 1988, Illinois experienced an extreme drought. At that time, they had 14 reactors operating here. And what we were finding baffled us, because as the need for electricity grew for air conditioning, the NRC, or excuse me, the then utility Commonwealth Edison, was taking reactors offline. And we thought that was a bit bewildering. And now at the time, they also ran coal plants, so they were able to meet electrical demand. What we found, though, when we actually went out to Region 3 office at NRC was that reactors were being taken offline because the river system in Illinois had been depleted so much from the drought that both the volume of the rivers and the flow rates were below standards, which could guarantee the safe operation of the plant. Now, I bring that up as an example because in a climate disrupted world where, what was it, just yesterday, we set a new modern day record for the hottest day on historic record, we're going to experience more severe droughts. So generally, my question to you is, what is your experience on the NRC's ability to handle the drought problem and the inability to cool the reactors because of loss of the primary heat sinks at some of the reactors, not just in Illinois, but around the country? I would also point out, I believe Dave Lochbaum of Union of Concerned Scientists formerly did a paper on this. And if he wishes to comment after your comments, Jeff, that would be fine with me too. So I'll turn it over to you.
So you bring up one problem with high temperatures across the globe. There's another problem, is that for plants that are on lakes, the lake can warm up. And so there's a document for every plant called the plant's technical specifications, which lay out a set of very firm, fixed, well understood rules about what has to happen every day for the plant to operate that day. And most of that is wrapped around equipment requirements. We talked a little bit about diesels. If too many of the diesels are unavailable for too long, then the plant is required to shut down. I bring tech specs up because there are limits in there about water levels. If the water levels get too low or the water levels get too high, then the plant is often required to be shut down. Likewise, if the water temperature in the lake gets too hot, then the plant's required to shut down. The plants were designed, they need a certain amount of water under emergency conditions, and that water can't be too hot. And if they don't meet those requirements, then the plant's required to shut down. Now, there are plants in Illinois, I want to say it was either Byron or Braidwood, they a couple of years ago came to the NRC and said, hey, our ultimate heat sink's getting too hot. We're required to shut down. We think the pond's going to cool off in the next couple of days because of the weather patterns. Can we operate up, instead of operating to, I'm going to make up a number, 90 degrees before we shut down, can we operate until 93 degrees? And the NRC sometimes has said, yeah, that's okay. And sometimes they may have said, no, you got to stay within the existing limits. So, so those limits exist. The thing about those is they're real easy to monitor. You stick you stick a depth gauge in the river, you know how low the river is. You stick a thermometer in the lake, you know how hot the lake is. And so you can see the water level changing or the temperature changing. And these are comparatively slow moving events. And the plant can be shut down long before you exceed those limits, before it becomes a problem. And once the plant shut down, the need for water is significantly reduced. It's not eliminated, but it's significantly reduced. So you're right, those things are happening, and they are issues to be concerned with, but they're not the issues that keep me up at night. All right, a bigger hurricane coming in and hitting South Texas or Turkey Point or St. Lucie, those are comparatively rapid events, or a tornado is a very rapid event. The derecho at Duane Arnold, the day started out, it was a beautiful summer day. The weather service was talking about maybe they might have some rainstorms or thunderstorms, but nobody predicted the derecho. And the forewarning they got was something like 20 minutes. And so these are things that are much more rapid. They're, even if Duane Arnold, got the forewarning, and they tried to operate through it. They didn't shut down the plant ahead of time. Even if they tried to shut down the plant, they could only get 20 minutes into a shutdown, which takes 24 hours to complete. So it's the rapid events that are much more worrying than these events that take longer. Another thing another hazard that you have to think about is fires. Now, if you guys are probably familiar with a lot of the work that the NRC and the industry has done on fires, but that's all on internal fires. The fire starting inside the plant. Well, if you get these really dry, hot conditions with a drought, if you're Diablo Canyon on the coast and it dries out, now all those grass and trees and brush become tinder. Was the plant really designed to withstand that? It might have been, it might not have been, but those external fires might be a hazard too. I've never seen anybody think about climate change and its impact on external fires in the nuclear industry. Other people look at it, but the nuclear industry hasn't done much on it.
Okay, if I could just add, back in the 88 experience that I mentioned, ComEd lost about 100 reactor days of either total shutdown or partial shutdown of the reactors of the 14 they had. As we entered this century, though, what we were finding was more of what you described of license variations or permissions to exceed standards, which says to me they're getting a little bit more permissive about that aspect of the plant operation. So just wanted to bring that up as a point.
Yeah, and another point along that line, the French have experienced a lot of lost production because of, I don't think it's low water levels, it's more high temperature in the water, that they've been required to shut plants down because the water's been too hot.
Right.
And of course, one of the things that goes on, this is at the worst possible time. These are really, really hot days when the air conditioning loads are really high and people really want power. And it's kind of humorous because the industry right now talking about climate change and the increase in demand for electricity and nuclear plants are in the industry is talked about as being very resilient to climate change. And it's like, yes, but
we also had an instance where during one of those droughts, Donald C. Cook reactor across Lake Michigan from Chicago automatically scrammed because the internal reactor building temperature exceeded safety guidelines. And I believe in the French instance you mentioned, they literally were calling out local fire departments to hose down the reactor buildings. So I assume
I hadn't heard that.
They were having the same problems. Okay, I'll shut up, and Craig and Mark Lundholm also have some questions. Thanks, Jeff.
Go ahead, Craig. Unmute. Good. Oh, good to see you too.
Hi, Jeff, and thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. I wanted to get your take of the safety culture within the NRC. What's your sense? Has the safety culture been degrading over time, or has it always been the way it is?
I'm not a safety culture expert. I joined the agency in 2005 and I retired in 2021. And when I talk to people that have been there, started with the agency before I did, the agency even in 2005 was much different than the agency that was there in the 90s, and certainly much different than the agency that was there in the 80s. There are a bunch of really smart people there. There are a lot of people that think about safety, and everybody there wants to do the right thing. but there's a lot of pressure on the agency too, by the industry and by both directly and through Congress. And I was talking to a colleague the other day, and it's like, when was the last time that the NRC shut down a nuclear power plant, even temporarily? And the last time that happened was in like 1989 at Peach Bottom, when the operators were intentionally sleeping on duty, on shift. That's over 30 years ago. Now, there have been plants that have shut down since then, for whatever reason. The NRC said, don't start up until we give you permission. But the NRC hasn't shut a plant down since the late 1980s. And the other aspect is, pretty much everything that the industry asks for, the NRC eventually says, okay. They've never denied a license extension. I'm not saying they should, but they never have. They've never denied a plant and operating license. They've never denied the industry a change in the regulation. Sometimes the industry withdraws the request, but they've never come out and said no. Hopefully I've got that right. And today there's a lot of pressure on the agency, and I saw that when I was there. They didn't want to deal with staff saying this is a bad idea. The agency didn't want to deal with it, and they suppressed that kind of thing. I'd been involved with the Coney and for a couple of years, and at one point I wrote a non-concurrence disagreeing with a document that they were about to send out, and they addressed the non-concurrence, and they said it wasn't a problem. They followed the process, and over the next couple of months I wasn't assigned to a Coney anymore. That's what happens often. They just reassign you to other things and get you out of the way that way. And it happens a lot. So, but that's different than, the safety culture. When you talk about safety culture at the NRC, that's different than the safety culture that the NRC imposes on the industry. Hopefully that answers your question.
I guess I'm driving toward a more practical question. As independent citizens, we're not insiders at the NRC. We're not in Congress. What do you feel is our best lever to try to help the staffers at the NRC do the right thing? I mean, we're in meetings, and clearly, the wrong decision is being made. We're doing things that are really dangerous in the light. The plants are 50 years old. They're in a degraded state. They're talking about, giving them another 20, 30, 50 years. And well, let's not even try to think about improving any of the regulations. In fact, let's just skip the existing regulations. So what do you have any advice for us as independent citizens? And we're in the meetings. What should we be saying? How can we get the attention, or give the support we need to the insiders at the NRC who are feeling the pressure to keep their mouth shut and not do the right thing? Do you have any advice for that?
Well, there's really no way you can support the individuals. All you can do is what you're doing now, and that is going to the meetings, asking good questions. If you can get the media to go, the NRC's worst nightmare is having the Washington Post write an article about something that the NRC did or didn't do, that must give them, the management there, just nightmares to have that happen. And so if you can get the press to go and you can get them to write a story, that will have tons of impact. I should have added in my presentation that my suspicion is that the NRC is going to be forced to address climate change impact on nuclear plant risk and environmental impacts here shortly. The pressure is growing. You know, the CEQ started it, which is one government agency. The GAO just eviscerated them with their report earlier this year, and this dissent by the licensing board. I look at that as a blueprint for interveners to write requests for hearings in the future. I think they're gonna cave and come around pretty quick on climate change. I don't hold my breath thinking that the NRC will put a lot of restrictions on the industry, but they're gonna have to deal with it one way or another. So it's really hard. I mean, you know, one of the things that this is getting really down and deep into the details. But when President Trump was president, he put in place an executive order to create a Schedule F for government employees. And, you know, the entire technical staff at the NRC are civil servants. And so they're protected by the laws regarding civil servants. But this Schedule F could reclassify not just NRC employees, but employees across the government into Schedule F, and then they would be subject to dismissal based on the administration's decisions, and that would have huge impact on the NRC or other agencies like EPA if the people that have been, you know, working for the government were all of a sudden reclassified as Schedule F and said you're no longer needed, go home. You know, when President Biden took over, he rescinded that executive order, but it's always subject to come back with a different president.
Thank you.
I would say thank you also. Now there's a problem here. The person who has the Illinois phone number that ends in 6157, I would rather that person wait for Mark Lundholm. And so we're going to call on Mark Lundholm next, and then that person will be called on after Mark.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Interesting presentation. I'm just wondering who has jurisdiction over the nuclear industry, and so that was. And just a couple of quick comments. We had a derecho roar through northeastern Illinois last week or the week before, which also spawned like 12 tornadoes. So that was real fun. And this whole thing reminds me of Hanford microcosms. And don't even get me started on that. I'm sure you all know what that's about, and it never gets cleaned up and it's going to blow up, but we hope. So anyway, thanks for doing this. I'll get off.
Was there, Mark, was there a question in there?
His question, he wrote in the chat very clearly. Who does have authority over the NRC and the nuclear industry?
So, well, Congress has authority over the NRC. There's a committee in the Senate and a committee in the House that have direct jurisdiction over over the NRC. They control the budget, they write the legislation, they have direct control. The president nominates, and the Senate confirms the nominations for the 5 commissioners. And they each serve a 5-year term. One term expires every year. The president cannot fire them because they are an independent agency. The one besides nominating the commissioners, the one other power that the president has is he gets to pick the chairman of the commission. So a new president can demote the existing chairman and promote a commission member to chairman of the commission. So the president does have that authority. As far as who regulates the industry, the NRC has sole jurisdiction on reactor safety. And they're the only ones that can say a plant's not safe enough. But your local public utility commission has authority over rates and other things. You know, in California, there's a dozen different state regulatory agencies that can control the nuclear power plants in California. There's a coastal commission. There's I don't know. There's all kinds of commissions. So it depends on the state what state regulations can control certain aspects of a utility and a nuclear power plant that the utility owns. But the NRC is the only one allowed to regulate plant safety.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm wondering if it's worth discussing maybe later a case of Barron who was kicked off the NRC, and we were very sad about that. Okay, so Diane,
So-
you're ready.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something to follow on the committees in the Senate and the House that have jurisdiction over the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The nuclear power industry is well endowed with our money, our tax money, and our rates, and they have basically bought those committees. So anybody who's on the energy committees in the Senate or the House it gets a lot of campaign contributions and other support from the nuclear industry. And when you watch the hearings, it's more often that those senators and representatives on those committees are reprimanding the NRC for being too regulatory. And as everybody knows, those terrible bills that passed a few months ago by huge margins direct the NRC to try to shift its mission to be more promotional and less regulatory, although they really can't do it because the basic law that told them to be regulators wasn't changed, but they're still supposed to be more promotional. So that's really frustrating.
So I agree with most of what you said. I think that there are some senators and congressmen that
Yeah.
are in the pocket of the industry, but there's a term in the government and outside the government that you're probably familiar with, and that's regulatory capture.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the NRC is a captured regulator. Okay. And, you know, in my discussion of Oconee, I mentioned that it was originally licensed not by the NRC, but by the Atomic Energy Commission. And the AEC was split in 1974, I believe. And the reason it was split was The AEC had responsibility for weapons development and for nuclear power plant regulation, but they also had legal responsibility for promoting peaceful uses of nuclear power. And in the 70s, that conflict of interest of regulating and promoting the nuclear power industry was recognized. And the solution that the Senate and the Congress came up with was to split the AEC into two. The NRC became the sole regulator of commercial nuclear power plants. And after a few iterations, the rest of the then AEC became the Department of Energy. But now with this recent legislation that talks about a responsibility for promoting nuclear power, that division seems to be either gone or at least to some degree weakened.
Well, they didn't amend the
Atomic
Energy Reorganization Act, but they told the NRC to redirect its mission to be more promotional, but it's within the constraints of the existing Atomic Energy Act and Energy Reorganization Act. It's still, we've got an uphill battle, and I was just being frustrated. I didn't mean to take a lot of time.
No, well, I think this is an interesting and a useful direction to talk about. I read that too, and the thing, I haven't read the actual bill, now law, but all the analysis that I've seen says the biggest thing that I see is the NRC is required to change its mission statement.
Right.
Well, I'm sure I knew what the mission statement was when I was there. I've since forgotten, but I can guarantee you that people don't think about the mission statement very often. Okay, and that's, it's such, in my mind, such a superficial requirement. It's like it doesn't change anything. Okay, all the legislation that the Congress has passed over the last 10 years seems to be the same thing. Come up with better rules, easier rules, less costly rules, faster processes. It's like it's all high level MBA speak, and it doesn't tell anybody how to do it. It just says, do it better, do it faster, do it quicker, do it cheaper. It's like, and the NRC tries, but it's a bureaucracy, and unless somebody comes in and comes up with a concrete example or direction, it's pretty hard to implement. Now, don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying that what Congress did was okay or a good thing, or that it's irrelevant. It just seems to me it's
superficial.
Yeah. Now, maybe there is something in there that has more bite to it. I mean, one of the things somebody was telling me about is the chairman has the authority to hire 200 people directly. Now, 200 people is a lot of people. That's almost 10% of the staff. And he doesn't have to go through the formal hiring process. He can just reach out and hire people. But what do you do with 200 people? I mean, are you just going to slide them into the organization and say they can ignore the existing processes and procedures? You can't do that. Are they going to change the processes and procedures? Well, maybe, but many of those processes and procedures have to go in the Federal Register and have to be noticed and put it, allow public comment. I mean, none of this stuff is fast. I'm not saying don't worry about it. It bothers me.
There's other worse stuff in that bill, in that law.
Yeah, I think we need to congratulate Mark Lundholm for this really very interesting discussion. but it is, well, where I am, it's only 6:45, but I think most people are hitting 10 o'clock. So I like to, now, I'm not sure who this person is from Illinois. 773-409-6157. Please.
Hi, this
Oh,
probably me.
it's
Hi,
who? It's Jake.
it's Jake.
Yeah. Okay,
Hi.
go ahead, Jake.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. Sorry, I missed your name and affiliation. But also, could you state that again? But also, I'm on the phone, so I can't see your visuals. I wonder if you could print those out and send them to me.
Yeah,
But also,
those things
what?
are going to be available, and I will send you the I will send you a copy of the flyer that has the information about Jeff on it. Is that okay, Jeff?
Okay.
Okay. So now we're gonna.
Okay, but let me get my main question. My question is, why do they build this nuclear power plant adjacent to a to a dam? Dams in California, the dams in California, they have a notorious history of flooding. There's one in particular. There's a horrible flood that happened in the 1930s in California, in Southern California, because it was basically there was a dam that collapsed, and the dam was designed by a guy by the name of William Mulholland, who's an employee of the city of Los Angeles. He didn't have any business designing that dam because he didn't even have a high school education. So why did they build this nuclear power plant adjacent to a dam? I don't understand that.
So I appreciate the question. Just real quick, my name's Jeff Mitman. I retired from the NRC 3 years ago.
Okay.
So what do I want to say about building a coney? And I wouldn't say next to a dam. I would say underneath the dam. And the best thing I can come up with is Duke they're idiots. Okay. Why would you build anything that has such a high value and such a high risk underneath a dam? You just don't do it. You know, there's plenty of land around there that they could have owned or that they do own that's high ground that they could have built on. I can only speculate as to why they did it. And I'll speculate they had to own the land anyway, so they owned it. It decreased their footprint a little bit. It decreases their cost of pumping power to cool the plant by building it underneath two dams. But nobody in their right mind would do it. I mean, but we're also talking about the 1970s, and maybe they don't know as much as we know today. Something to keep in mind that I haven't talked about is Duke didn't just build their plant underneath the dam. They built the dams. They own the dams. And those two dams and the power plant were conceived of and built as a system to maximize power generation and the ability to store water high up to be able to generate more electricity. It was all a very carefully orchestrated, thought through plan to supply water to the power plant and to store water for the power plant. And the Jocassee Dam is a pump storage facility. I don't want to go into the details, but they could have done all of that and just built the power plant up on a hill. But no, they built the power plant underneath the dam that they built to supply water to the power plant. It's just ludicrous.
Yeah, so just follow up. As long as they own the dam, you say there are two dams on top of each other. As long as they own the dams, why do they make it? Why did they make it a hydroelectric plant? I don't understand why they needed the nuclear plant there, unless they wanted the subsidies that go with it.
Well, the deal is, the plan way back when was during the day, during peak demand times, they can let water through the Jocassee Dam and generate electricity to supply power to the community. So that's what they can do as a hydro unit. But the hydro generating plant, they can reverse the hydro turbines and turn them into pumps. And so they can actually pump water from the Kiwi Reservoir up to the Jocassee Reservoir. So the idea is, in the middle of the night, when demand for electricity is really low from the nuclear plant, they can use the excess capacity in the nuclear plant to pump water from Kiwi up above the Jocassee Dam. And then when their demand goes up in the day, or at the end of the day in the evening, they can reverse the hydro units again, pass the water back through the hydro units, and generate more electricity at that time of day. So the Jocassee Reservoir becomes like a big old battery for storing electricity. And they're not the only ones that do pump storage. And it's a good way to shift your supply and your demand across different times of the day. It's a really good idea. But they could have done the same thing, but not built the nuclear plant underneath the dams. They should have built them up on high ground. But for whatever reason, they didn't. But you've probably all seen pictures of the Fort Calhoun station
Surrounded by water.
in Nebraska when they flooded in 2011, and you get, yep, there's the picture, and you get they build a power plant in a floodplain. We could talk more about that if you want. There's some great stories about that, things that aren't common knowledge. They have what they call a hydroberm, which is a big old inner tube that big. It's 12 feet in diameter and a couple hundred feet in circumference around, and they put it around the nuclear plant to keep the nuclear plant, the reactor building, dry. And it works, and they fill it with water, and it keeps the flood water out. And if you look, you can see pictures of the hydroberm where it's keeping the water out. Well, the chairman of the NRC, because of this flood, decides he needs to go out and look at the plant. He wants to make sure everything's good. And so he announces to everybody he's going to go out there. And so the utility gets one of these little bobcats, and they start running around inside the hydroberm to move things around to pretty it up and make it look better for when the NRC chairman comes out. And oops, he runs the bobcat into the hydroberm and pierces it. And so the thing, all the water rushes out of it, it collapses, and it lets the flood water in. So the chairman going out there made things worse. It's like you can't win. But why would you build a power plant in the floodplain? It just makes no sense. No sense. There's a study out there that says if the dam upstream of Fort Calhoun were to fail, there'd be 15 feet of water on the roof of the turbine building. On the roof of the turbine building. Okay. Now, what you don't think about very much is, where's the control room? Typically, not always, but typically the control room is on the top floor of the turbine building. So if you get 15 feet of water on the roof of the turbine building, that means the control room's underwater. It's like, really? Oh, well. Why build a power plant, in the middle of a floodplain? Why would you build anything? The floodplains, it's a great place to have agriculture, have farms, if it floods, it's a bad day, you ruin a crop. but, you know, put a chip manufacturing plant or an airport or, you know, a power plant in the middle of a floodplain, makes no sense.
Yeah, I was never gonna buy a house in a floodplain, and lo and behold, I did, and our house got flooded. Anyway, I'm gonna call on Dave next. So unmute Dave and let's hear your question.
This will be brief and it'll probably have to be the last one. I did have the slide ready because my question related to it. We renamed Fort Calhoun, Port Calhoun, because the only way you could get to it was by boat and helicopter. But I had better pictures before, which showed the location of the dry cask storage pad, which seemed to have been put on a artificially bermed up piece of land at a higher level than even some of the reactor buildings and the auxiliary buildings. So my question comes down to, have you had any thoughts or encountered anything in your NRC days as to the effects of climate change on the dry casks that are being positioned around most of the nuclear plants that are operating now?
So I know a little bit about dry casks. Before I joined the NRC, I worked for the Electric Power Research Institute, and they're a research organization that is funded by the electric utilities. Nuclear is a subset of what they do, but it's a big subset of what that organization does. And I was a project manager on a dry cask storage PRA, probabilistic risk assessment. The second, the NRC did the first one, EPRI did the second one. So, you know, I haven't thought a whole lot about climate change on casks. You know, they're air cooled, so temperature, outside air temperature would matter. You know, the higher temperature will cause the concrete to degrade a little bit faster. But I mean, the temperatures we're talking about aren't, as far as concrete goes, isn't extreme. You know, I just don't get too worried about cask storage. There's a lot of radioactive material in a cask, and certainly you don't want it to get out. That the fuel that's in there is still deadly if it gets close to people, and it will kill people very fast. But the thing about dry casks or cask storage is, even if you have a hole in the cask, there's no energy that's forcing anything out. So even if you have a hole in the cask, everything pretty much stays put. You know, it's just not something that is high on my list of things to worry about. But like everything else, you know, you have to think about it. I mean, who would have thought that anybody, you know, a couple of human errors and a large freighter would run into a bridge? You know, I mean, that couldn't possibly happen, could it? Nah, nobody would ever drive a boat into a bridge. I mean, stuff happens. And so you can't be too cavalier about it, which maybe I was a minute ago. You know, you got to think about it. You got to be, you need to look at it. You need to take it seriously when the consequences are so high. So, you know, I think somebody at the NRC really ought to look hard at is there an impact on climate change on casks? You know, my cavalier look is it doesn't seem to be.
Well,
but I'm not an expert on casks either. So
okay, well, specifically, I could give an example. Since the casks are air cooled, as you said, there's a vent at the bottom and a vent at the top because it's convection cooled. If you plug up the vent at the bottom, either through debris or over icing or whatever, you stop the airflow. and that builds up heat within the cask. Now, you're right, it certainly isn't going to be like a meltdown, but you may degrade the fuel in there, making it pretty deadly when you have to move that material to the final repository that is never going to get built. So I mean, that's just going to cascade of problems, but that's what I wanted to see if you had heard anything about, or if you had any thoughts.
I have not. I know that they, you know, another thing you got to worry about is, do animals, critters go in there and nest in those vents? And they, you know, I think they found that they have. And you have to think about those things. And if they nest in there, will they block the vent? And if you know, it's not just one vent, there are multiple vents, and how many vents have to be blocked before it becomes a problem? You seriously have to think about those things. You know, the casks at Oconee are underneath the dam. You know, if that dam fails, you know, I don't know how much material, you know, stone, rock, earth are in those dams. Where is that going to go? Is it going to block the vents on the spent fuel, the storage casks at Oconee? You know, I don't know. Maybe they build them a little higher so they're protected. You know, I don't know, but you do have to think about that stuff. You can't just be cavalier. I mean, the storage casks out at Songs, San Onofre in Southern California, it's like they built their storage facility on the beach. It's like, why on the beach? They own land inland. Why not build it inland? It's like, come on. It's like, why on the beach? You know, now they're going to have to worry about beach erosion and you know, and they're not going to solve the spent fuel storage problem anytime soon. And so, you know, people might have to be worrying about this 100 years from now. And it's like, what's climate change going to do in 100 years? Where's the beach going to be in 100 years? You know, I don't know. You know, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and we always used to go down to the Jersey Shore, and the beach is constantly moving, and they're constantly having to rebuild the beach. It's like, are they going to end up doing that at San Onofre? Who knows?
Well, we had a conference just yesterday. That's why I'm in San Diego. And the conference really focused a lot on the problem with the spent fuel at Songs, and the absolutely ridiculous design for the isthmus there. And I would recommend everyone to, the conference went on all day. And so if you are interested in this, you can skip through the videos to find the information about this that you want. But water is a moderator of the neutrons that come out of the spent fuel, and it will cause the cask to heat up, because the neutrons don't just escape like they normally would without water. And we have this problem with transport of spent fuel from Big Rock Point and Palisades in Lake Michigan, and also just north of us 30 miles, there's 65 spent fuel casks on the beach at Lake Michigan. And of course, we don't get ocean storms, but we had it like Mr. Lundholm said, we had a derecho come through here, 2 of them, in fact, and one of them was just a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, I don't feel comfortable taking up time, because I'm the moderator, I'm not a presenter, and our time is well spent. But I do want people to pay attention to Catherine Chuddy's comments in the chat. She made some comments, and we don't have time to have her come on and talk to us. And Mickey Marique also made some really good comments in the chat. So I hope that you will accept the chat and read these comments that we don't have time for right now. So I'm turning it back to Dave, because think that we don't have any more questions now, and it's, it's late. So Dave, you go ahead and take charge.
All right. Well, Jeff, I really want to thank you for spending 2 hours with us tonight. This presentation was really a blockbuster, and detailed as it was details that were needed to be heard. I'm glad to say we did record it tonight, and we will be making that available to people who request it. We will also be sending out the chat. Jan, if you have it available, if there is a link for people to see any of those sessions from the conference, maybe you can put that in the chat before we end the session tonight.
Well,
So,
the conference was just yesterday, and
if you don't have it, then fine, but if
okay.
you did,
Well,
that's
the Samuel, go to the Samuel Lawrence Foundation, because they are the people who will be putting out the conference information when it's ready. Samuel Lawrence Foundation.
okay. So,
Dave, before we sign off, can I add one piece of information that I think I forgot to talk about?
yes, please do.
So when I was talking about Dwayne Arnold, I said that they shut down 2 months before their planned permanent shutdown in 2020. Well, in the links that I supplied, there's a link to and I don't know whether it was CBS or NBC, but there's a news article that came out today, and NextEra, the owners of Dwayne Arnold, are now looking at restarting the plant.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up. Of course, they'll have to replace the cooling towers if they do. Anyway, just additional thought about that restart.
Sure.
Okay, I wanted to say one more thing about yesterday's conference, and that is the guy who wanted so badly to have Jeff come on, Paul Gunter, presented at the conference yesterday, and he focused on that GAO report that Jeff Mitman mentioned during his presentation.
And
So-
that's a fairly quick read, and it's not buried in technical speak. The links I gave you the link if you want to read it. I think it's about 40 pages. And if you go to the website that I supplied where you can download it, there's actually a 2-minute video that I just saw, and it's not kind to the NRC.
And those links will be made available when we send out that document in the chat. So again, thank you, Jeff, for spending your evening with us. I want to thank the participants and who've asked questions. Those of you who were listening in, I hope you got the information you felt you needed. Our next night with the expert will take place in August, on August 29th. We'll send you an announcement, and you can register when we have the presenter confirmed. So put that on your calendar, 7 o'clock Central Time, August 29th. We will be back here again. So in the meantime, write Congress and have them deal with the NRC's problems and inefficiencies and whatnot. I believe there was a budget hearing recently about the NRC budget. That might be a leverage point people can mention in your letters. All right, so thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
And Jeff, if you'll stay on a few minutes at the end, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, everybody. Cool.